Hey, everybody. Yay! Woo, post-lunch, coffee, whatever else you had, drowsiness aside. Totally understand. We are here to talk about open caching and the future of online video delivery. And this is the panel here. As you see their names up there, we have Eric Klein from MLBAM. We have Brett Mertens from Limelight. We have Dan Newman from ViaSat and Mark Fisher from Qwilt. So I'll give them a little bit of time to introduce themselves in just a second, but what I want to do is kind of just set the context of this conversation. What is open caching? And I'm Jason Thibeault, the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance. And I want to tell you a little bit about the Alliance and put everything sort of in picture of why we're here, why these panelists are here, and what really we're going to talk about. So the Streaming Video Alliance is a global consortium of companies that have come together to build best practices, technical specifications, functional requirements around online video. So it brings everybody from the ecosystem together. We have content providers, we have service providers, we have technology companies. Everyone's really sort of coming and collaborating on issues like delivery architecture. So for example, open caching. And that's one of the things that we announced earlier this year at CES was an open caching initiative and a proof of concept. So the group, the Streaming Video Alliance, has a working group called Open Caching, much like other standards organizations and other industry associations have working groups. This working group, Open Caching, has put together some functional requirements around how to develop an open architecture that allows everybody across the value chain in streaming video delivery to participate in that delivery. So we announced our proof of concept at CES, and that proof of concept basically summarized what we're trying to do with open caching. So if you understand publishing content today, it's really very simplistic, right? So content is carried through from the publisher via the CDN to the service provider, right? Through the service provider. So in many ways, the CDNs terminate content on the service provider network. So they just kind of dump content into the network. And the service provider has to deal with it. They don't really get a chance to improve the experience with that. They don't really get a chance to play in the monetization of it. And so what we've done with open caching is we've really done two things. We've improved the potential quality. So the idea behind this proof of concept with all these companies is to improve the quality of the end user experience by caching within the provider network, right? Putting an open cache in their network and allowing them to do two things. One is reduce that latency of delivery because you're delivering closer to the end user. And the second thing is to participate in the monetization of that content. So three things that really sort of open caching does, right? Is it improves quality, it improves the economics, and it improves the reach. Now, the really interesting thing about this is these are the companies that are participating in our proof of concept today. All of the companies up here, as you can see by the logos, are actually on the list. So you have a great representation of service providers, content owners, technology companies who are we're gonna talk about sort of what are the benefits of open caching, why is open caching really needed today, and sort of how can we get to a place where everyone can participate. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it over to our panelists for just a little bit. I want them to explain sort of themselves, hey, this is who I am, this is my company, this is what we do, to, again, put the conversation into context. So we'll start with Brett Mertens at Limelight.
Hello, everybody. Brett Mertens at Limelight. I've been with Limelight for about 2 years now. I'm a product manager for the Content Delivery Network. In that job, I handle really the edge and entrance to our network for our HTTP and HTTPS traffic. Before Limelight, I worked at Internap, a smaller CDN doing that. And before that, I worked actually in the video streaming space. So I wasn't primarily concentrating on just HTTP delivery, but more the video side of it. I've been doing this for a while. My first large-scale live streaming event was for WCW back in 1998. We had like 50,000 viewers, breaking a record back then. Been in it for a while. Limelight's been in it for a while too as a CDN. And I think as a company we've started doing some pretty interesting stuff. Over the past couple of years we found there was some movement away from the CDN business by many players in the space because of the commoditization of the market. Here a couple of years later, I think we're found that CDN is just as important as it ever was going to be, and it's going to be more important as time goes on. And Limelight is really focused as a company just on the CDN portion of the business, and really I think has found some good success over the past couple of years because of that.
Fantastic. Eric.
I'm Eric Klein, Director of Infrastructure Delivery at MLBAM, BAM Tech. I previously came from Limelight, actually. I've been at BAM for about a year. My role in the kind of ownership process is to deliver the content out from our origins and manage with all of our different content delivery network partners. So we have a whole host of delivery partners, from the Limelights to the Akamais to different players in the space. And we have to not only normalize all of the different technical functions of what they do, but also manage with them kind of some of those business economics. So to JT's point about the open caching group looking at economics and quality and stability for performance purposes, it kind of fits into our wheelhouse as a content owner to care about all of those factors however we can get it, whether it be through our existing partners or through the open caching working group that we've been working on and some of the different solutions there. So I've been playing kind of a key role in some of the POCs that have been going on and providing a lot of that content from a live standpoint and troubleshooting any issues that have come up with the different members of the panel here, and definitely think that there's a lot of value in delivering content in as widely a distributed manner as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Eric. And Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Newman. I'll start by telling you a little bit about ViaSat, because it's probably uncommon company name here in this forum. So we're an internet service provider. We provide high-speed internet and high-speed streaming services via satellite to a number of different customer types. We happen to have about 650,000 homes here in the US who are subscribers. We have another 160,000 subscribers in Europe. We're starting to build tens of thousands in Australia, and most recently we're starting to run trials in Mexico of providing internet to villagers there in locations where they don't have any connectivity at all at this point. Additionally, and probably more interestingly, is we're also a high-speed internet provider on commercial aircraft. So we provide high-speed streaming to JetBlue, Qantas in Australia, Virgin America again in the US. We have El Al in Israel and Europe, and soon we'll be flying with American and SAS and a few others. So what we're interested in and what we're doing, we're delivering all these bits from space. We have the world's largest amount of capacity in space at this point. I think a lot of people thought about satellite internet or internet from space as sort of a lesser choice. We don't believe that's true anymore, and we're in the process of building a constellation that'll be delivering terabits of capacity. My role, I'm the head of our media delivery architecture team. So what I'm concerned about is the efficiency by which we deliver not just data, but high-speed streaming, and making sure that's efficient. And we see open caching as a really one of the components of really important component of doing that.
Thank you, Dan. And Mark?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Fisher. I'm responsible for marketing and business development at Qwilt. Qwilt is a software and cloud services company. We sell our solution to ISPs, big ISPs, telcos, mobile, fixed broadband, cable, and in doing so, enable open caching, the edge cloud, if you were here for the earlier session, in those networks. We're a founding member of the Streaming Video Alliance, and I think as JT rightly says, at least as I think we've seen it, a ton of the value of what we've done there, which is a little bit of what we're discussing now, is the collaboration, the cooperation among the participants. You witness the group that's in the POC. The technical things you can get past fairly quickly. In my, that's easy for me to say. I'm from marketing, but the business collaboration, getting people to work together, see in it their own goals being furthered, and therefore get on board with kind of a new model. That's I think a lot of the value we're seeing, and it's a powerful place to do that. And by the way, since I'm the only one, maybe one of the few that's not Limelight, since JT came from Limelight. I just saw that. For all I know, Dan probably came from Limelight earlier.
Yeah.
But just as a quick plug for Limelight, first of all, they've been a great partner in this process. But secondly, If you haven't seen it, you should take a look at their last quarter results, because if anyone thought that there's promise and a bright future in the CDN industry, look at what Limelight's done over the last, say, year, especially in the last quarter in terms of margins and revenue. I mean, it's a great story, and it says a lot about where I think things are going here. So good
Absolutely.
stuff.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you get a sense here of the panel. This is really the ecosystem, right? So you've got content, you've got CDN, you've got ISP, you've got technology provider. This is a great opportunity to sort of understand how open caching as an architecture for future content delivery really does benefit the industry as a whole. So let's start out with kind of a high-level question for you guys, all right? Talking about delivering content today, what are some of the challenges of delivering it at scale globally? Right? Why would we even need open caching? What are some of the challenges that you guys see in the industry today? They're all writing their answers down. It's a test. I'm quizzing them after.
I mean, I can kick it off as the kind of content provider in the space, with some ongoing projects where I've been looking into this as well. And there's only so much capacity to go around within existing delivery networks, within existing networks that I can directly interface with. And part of the challenge that comes with that is when you're delivering your content, you want to have at least some control and say within the process. So today, I have control and say in terms of how my content delivery networks are handling my content, the intelligence that we can do, some of the edge cloud compute that people have been talking about throughout the conference. But when it gets to the ISP level, it becomes more difficult to have A, that visibility, and B, that control. And without that, I sometimes am left to the whim as to what's the right way for, or how is my content performing, and then in turn, how can I address challenges that might pop up. So if you look at kind of the space as a whole, it makes it more difficult, not only if you're dealing with the 7 or 8 large ISPs within the domestic US, but you start to go globally, and you have all these different partners. You start to go to space, you have even more partners you need to consider. How do you manage that today without kind of some framework in place? It's quite challenging.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I think I'd add in that customers have the connection at the end. Generally, they're controlling the player that's being used, and they're getting data from it now that's providing them insights that they didn't have before, the view into what's going on with their end users, and the performance of a CDN is at a level now that it hasn't been before. I think you're going to see that increase exponentially over the next 12 months, and the importance of that data for people going up all the time. We've talked a lot over the past years, as I was saying earlier, about CDN becoming a commoditized market, but really the reality of it is that's used to drive our price down an awful lot. But when I'm talking to customers, what they're talking about is rebuffer rates that they're seeing inside of their players, and how often is that occurring, and the importance of that to them, because their users are abandoning them if they have issues there. So a couple of years ago, we weren't really thinking about that as an industry and a market. There were some conversations about it and some players in the space, but really it's everybody in the video delivery space, and all conversations are headed in that direction now.
So Dan, I'm gonna just pick on you because you're delivering from space. So when do we get internet access from Mars? I'm kidding. But what do you see as some of the critical challenges, to delivering at scale? Because you guys are delivering a lot of content now.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things. One is as a satellite provider or wireless provider, volume, just the sheer volume that's needing to be delivered. So we can support the speeds, we can support the qualities, but when you combine those two things, you end up with too much demand on the network. And for a wireless provider or a satellite provider, you need to you want to make sure you're providing as much consumption as possible at the highest quality as possible, but you end up with trade-offs that you don't want to make for your customers. So anything that can essentially reduce the redundancy in what needs to be transmitted is going to help everyone consume more. And then I would say the other side of things would be challenges would be in the sort of just on the distributed nature of the network environment, especially for ours, because we are growing globally. And if you think about when we need to access the capacity in that satellite, it's not as simple as a couple of towers in a regional area. We have gateway earth stations across the continent. And in order to get all that content moved around, we need a lot of essentially points of presence, if you want to use that term. And just the complexity of managing those that many items, and then if you combine that with needing slightly different solutions for slightly different content providers, that can get sort of unwieldy. So, looking at multi-tenant solutions, I think, or open solutions with open APIs that allow a sort of a streamlined approach to doing this, I think, is pretty important.
Okay. You have anything to add to that, Mark?
I think, note, at least for me, is just seeing the aspiration of some of the members of the Streaming Video Alliance. If you look at what BAM has done, MLBAM, with their platform, never being satisfied with the last record they busted and saying, no, there's, raise the bar, raise the bar. Fox, similarly, Thomas Edwards chaired the QoE working group, and his single problem was how do we achieve, on scale, streaming to millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. And I think that pushes everyone in the right path to say, this is now the challenge, so now how do we, rise to this and solve that problem? And I like the idea that the content providers are leading that effort, saying this is what I need, and then it allows us all to get in line and solve the problem. It's good.
No, and that leads us really nicely to our next question, which is more around change. So obviously, things have changed over the past few years in the way we deliver content. What do you guys see as some of those key changes that have happened? Let's give it a time frame over the past 3 years. What's really changed in the way we deliver content and our approach to delivering content? They're thinking. Ooh, I stumped them with a question. That's fantastic. So thinking about that, right? I'm gonna put something out there. Can we deliver the kind of experience we want to deliver to end users using the existing architectures that we have today? Is it possible? Is it possible to deliver a broadcast quality experience at scale using what we have today, or using what we had a couple of years ago?
Well, if you look at the cable that I'm watching in my hotel, the podcast level experience isn't that hard to achieve. I think that the numbers go up every year. The scale is just changing. The market's changing. Who's using the services are changing. My mom's using a Roku now to stream stuff, and she's not watching stuff on traditional cable anymore. When she started to join the pack here, the whole everybody else is already on board. So that viewership is changing quite a bit. And as I was saying earlier, I think the complexity of the customers like MLB and their understanding of what's happening with their content, it wasn't that many years ago where they would have said, we're going to have a big event. And at the end, they would have come to us and said, as a CDN, not necessarily Limelight, but as any CDN, they would have come to us at the end and go, okay, how did that event go? Yeah. Instead of now when I talk to my customers, they're telling me things about what's occurred in the network and how performance was at a different spot in it. And it's not because their end users, their viewers, have called up and complained about what's going on. It's because they've collected that data from the system and they're doing analysis of it and making decisions because they see it as mission critical to accomplishing their goals. So it's really a different type of interaction. You have to work much harder now to do a good job, and people know whether or not you're doing a good job. You're getting a report card from at least some percentage of your customers as a CDN all the time as to, you did this event, this is how well it went, and this is how much traffic, because everybody's doing multi-CDN, which is, I guess, a new thing too. This is how much traffic I gave you because of your performance, is something that just really wasn't happening like that at all, in my experience, at least 4 or 5 years ago.
I think to Brett's point and Dan's point from before, there's two challenges that have kind of changed in the last couple of years that are becoming more and more prevalent. The first one is that as a content provider now, I'm constantly paying attention to performance. It's critical to my end customers. It's critical to how things are getting delivered, and it's a key, crucial aspect of that workflow that, as an individual responsible for delivery, I need to consider. And then the second point, to what Dan was saying before, the requirement for capacity at larger scale goes up and up. You know, as Brett's mom gets a Roku and everyone's mom gets a Roku or an iOS device, that's more and more content streaming in different ways that people haven't streamed through before. You know, the latest numbers about OTT of just cable packages, you know, have completely shifted, and there's, you know, millions of people that are now watching through alternative means that ESPN, you know, for example, can't reflect in their numbers, but it's still being done. And people are still using different packages and receiving content in those new, unique ways. And as content providers, we need to figure out a way to get our content delivery partners to fulfill it.
Thoughts over there as well? I mean, things that have changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen the Streaming Video Alliance founded in the fall of 2014. So just the idea that a group within the industry had the presence of mind to say, hey, we probably should get together and start to work on some of these things together, because that'll accelerate everything. And, you know, we were talking a lot about open caching, which is near to us, but there's work on scaling, on QoE, on privacy. I mean, the list is quite long and deep as to the sorts of problems that the group feels are deserving of everyone's attention. And I'm impressed, you know, the logo slide you put up earlier of the number of people who've turned out to be part of this. Again, it speaks to the need that we should get together and work on these things together to accelerate the outcome. The other thing that I sense is different is streaming is kind of leading, if you will. I've never been a part of the broadcast industry, but I've heard things like, you know, 4K will first come via streaming because the TV sets aren't necessarily there and the rest of the ecosystem to support and broadcast. And it suggests that, you know, now maybe streaming is leading the charge on many things. Many new innovative experiences will happen there first, maybe there only, and you can get the sense of the change in momentum of the whole industry investing in that path. But in terms of what we've done, the number of deployments we've made, these POCs that we announced briefly and recently, they all give us good data that says we're on the right path. We need to refine, but it's the right place to be investing in at least part of the architecture that's needed to scale. It's not the entire solution by any means, but it's part.
So interesting on that. Let me take a show of hands. How many people in this room are or consider themselves to be involved in the delivery of content? That's a lot. Let's hope so. All right, that's fantastic. So this next question then is very interesting. So we talk about scale, right? What do we need to deliver at scale? What are some of the challenges or some of the changes that have happened? So this third question is about the pain, right? So, and this is, I'm going to pick on you, Dan, once again.
Yeah.
Because this one's really directed kind of at you, but what pain do ISPs really face, you know, in this new kind of content delivery? Sort of as the demand for online video increases, what kind of pain are you guys feeling?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to my previous answer. You know, on the volume side of things, as a wireless provider, you know, it's really that trade-off between the number of concurrent users on a particular segment of the network and the quality that we can give them. So, you know, we have to figure out a way to balance that. And we want to figure out a way to get that content closer to the end user, because that's a way to, the way we like to think about it is removing the redundancy from it. It's supposed to just, I mean, you are caching it closer to the user, but essentially it's removing all these redundant copies that are being sent over segments of the network that you don't really need to do that on. So I think that's, one of the main things. And then the other thing is just, you know, we're not one of the largest service providers. Right now, we're kind of a medium-sized service provider, so the sort of the demand on us in terms of taking solutions from other providers in order to integrate them at that complexity, that scale of doing that globally, it's kind of out of balance. It's kind of outsized. It's kind of an outsized requirement. And I can't speak for some of the larger service providers, but I'm sure it puts a demand on them as well. But I think the ratio of our infrastructure points to other service providers might be a little bit different. So I think that's sort of the two pain points that I would think of for us.
So Mark, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, I know you guys really sell into the ISPs,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, and I think Dan's points are right on, certainly. And in terms of conversations we've had with big ISPs, some of the big cable companies in the U.S., they've done a little bit of the math on their own network planning, capacity planning, and have run through cases like if everyone just wanted to stream HD to every home, maybe to 2 devices in every home, because that probably is what happens. On a particular night, because it's the Super Bowl, parts of the network just break. I mean, you just can't sustain this inside their network. That's just a task to be dealt with. It's a problem to be solved. It's not an insurmountable thing, but it gives you the sense of the magnitude of scale that needs to be addressed. I think the other point that was raised earlier, and I agree with, is this idea of being able to be very clear about what quality means. So how do I measure that, report it, and optimize around it, quality of experience, because often there's people with different views and measure it in different ways from different points, and then it's hard to reconcile all that. So that's in terms of problems you stated a moment ago, that's an area of, I think, really keen interest to the ISPs we're talking to. How do we know for sure what's happening, and how do we deal with it when we find issues?
Well, so bringing this back around now. So I kind of explained at the beginning what open caching was and what its value proposition really is, right? Delivery closer to the end user from within the service provider's network. We talked about scale, so critical challenge. We talked about changes, so that exposed some of the other things that have changed in video delivery. We just talked about pain points. So now let's talk about open caching, right? What does open caching solve, really, for all of these challenges and pain that service providers and networks are facing today? Can you guys talk a little bit about that and kind of discuss really where open caching comes into this whole solving the problems?
I think it solves different problems for different people in the workflow. For me, it solves the problem of lack of control downstream. Today, if I release my content to a CDN, I don't necessarily know if the ISP is respecting my cache control rules or the insight at that layer of how things are performing, and if they're properly shifting customers from one bad node of theirs to another. And so it opens up the visibility into that entire workflow for me, and also gives me more control to know the configurations that I've suggested to a Limelight is making its way to an open caching node and in turn to an ISP and behaving appropriately. So for me, it satisfies the need of visibility and knowing that I can at least eliminate some areas of potential problems that might impact my customer performance, that might impact quality, that might impact consistency.
Dan?
Yeah, I think I just sort of adding directly to what Eric is saying, I think it provides the beginnings of a basis of trust for this new way of doing things. So I think in particular, it allows, I call it clear delegation, so the content provider and the CDN can clearly decide whether or not they want to trust or delegate delivery responsibility to a component inside the ISP network, so having the control. And then on the flip side, it provides reporting, logging, real-time status back, which I think is what the content provider and the CDN pretty much have between each other today. And we're trying to come up with a solution to get these things to happen deeper in the network, and this provides a basis of doing that with that trust that I think we need in order to make this work.
I think that trust relationship is a pretty big cultural shift in how the approaches work, whether this project is successful or not. Just the fact that the conversation is occurring and that there's motion in this direction, I think, is a pretty interesting thing. I've been in product management in the CDN space now for 8 years, 9 years, something like that. And in that time, I've spent an awful lot of time not talking to other people about how my products actually work. I talk about the marketing of it and the impact to the end user in the last mile and the impact, the origin and the value that we bring. But all of the stuff that happens in the middle, we don't talk about in this space.
It's like Fight Club, right?
Yeah.
First rule of Fight Club: don't talk about Fight
You
Club.
don't talk about Fight Club. It's a really interesting shift, I think, that we're to a spot where sitting at a table with an ISP, and rather than just talking about a peering relationship and that I'm going to clobber you when the next Microsoft comes out, we can look at how does this work well together, and how do we make it flow and meaningful. I think the big win here is with the obvious one is with popular content, things that have large, huge volumes. At least with the folks that are sitting at this table, that's the obvious win here. When you've got 1 million viewers coming onto a stream, how does that work? The one that's really a difficult hurdle to overcome and to think about as from the CDN side of the house is for my customers that have not 1 million viewers coming to their piece of content, but have very long, large, long tail libraries of content, which is becoming more and more true in the video space. I'd like to tell you that the CDN has an infinite edge to it, but we know it doesn't. And it does seem like content libraries are actually sort of getting to the point where they're almost infinite in size. If you take all of the different folks out there and the amount of content that they're producing, we had Google in here earlier, and they're pretty open about talking about numbers, so they're a good one to reference when you think about 450 hours a minute of new content that they're adding into their network. Now, I don't see any of that, but 450 new hours to get that piece of video to the right places in the network and make the right decisions is a very complex process to get through. To make sure we're putting the right things into the open caching network is a pretty complex question to answer as a CDN. It's easy when you go Major League Baseball. People like that. It's going to be super popular. But I have a lot of customers that I don't understand the nature of their content when I get it until they start flowing stuff through the network.
Sure.
Everybody that ever always comes to me is going to have 1 million viewers on their first day in business of their content. That's just the story every time. The difference, I guess another thing that's different now between now and a couple of years ago is now some of those folks, when they show up, actually do have 1 million viewers on their first day. Yeah. Whereas before it was just a concept or a dream that they had going. So.
And I think to Brett's point, though, that it only impacts large-scale content. What I think is great about the way the group is being structured is that we're really trying to consider things from a technical standpoint that's going to scale, both from a small partner and a small piece of content that might have a long tail, all the way up to those large hyper-visual events. And you put the graph up before of the workflow of how it kind of works at a high level with the CDN and the content provider providing content through the CDN, and the CDN then redirecting it or rerouting it to the open caching nodes. But right. There's a lot of mechanism that's within there, that's within the specifications that we've started coming out with, that talk about how do the CDN edges talk to the open cache nodes and know where to send things and when to send things and when is it appropriate to redirect or when is it not. And in turn, that trust relationship that's been formed by both the business standpoint, but also by the specifications on a technical standpoint are kind of crucial to kind of getting out with the old and coming in with the new, but doing so in a way that doesn't massively shift either industry and considers the content provider in the role as well.
Just to add to this, I agree with these points. And this is kind of a framing point because we started with the idea like what's the problem that ISPs see. And you talk to an ISP, they hear problem, then they'll say, well, give me something to make the pain go away. Can you stop the bleeding? You enter into this like very closed path of logic. It's not the right place to go. It doesn't do justice to the opportunity. We really want to say, this is an opportunity that presents possibility because this is a place you want to invest in infrastructure to enable these use cases that we just described. Not that it just makes pain go away, but that it opens up the door to two things: greater collaboration with the upstream ecosystem, more participation, as you said earlier, JT, more participation in the actual delivery of content, and then opening the door to all the new possibilities of content delivery, application delivery that are worthy of the edge cloud. Look, Amazon, AWS is doing things today that probably few dreamed of. And I think our thesis certainly, and our proposal to the ISP is that's the same kind of edge cloud opportunity that you can build to. You want to invest to build to this kind of opportunity. So don't think of this as just simply making pain stop. Look at it as something new. And that resonates, I think, strongly. This is the mindset you want folks like this to be in, so that they're leaning in to spending money on this kind of infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's do this really quickly. Two questions. One is, show of hands again. How many people in here are watching lots of video on their mobile phones? That's pretty substantial. I mean, so that's going to lead me into another question. But before I jump into that question, I kind of want to bring your attention to the title of this panel again, right? Sort of open caching and the future of online video delivery. So I think when we talk about open caching, we think about the technical aspects of it. We think about the components, the bits and pieces. But what you guys have been really bringing out is this trust and collaboration. That really seems to be the future of online video delivery. It's not just another technical architecture. It's a way that people are going to work together, right, to really sort of bring this world of online video to the levels that people want it to be at, which is what that broadcast quality at scale. So let's do this. So we've got about 25 minutes, and I want to make sure that you guys have a chance to ask questions of our panelists as well. So I'm going to pause my questions for a second, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys for just for as long as we need to. But does anyone right now have any questions for any of the panelists based on what they've been talking about so far? Sure.
Hey, so it seems like a lot of the sort of current open caching request routing specifications are focused around sort of the interaction between a CDN and an ISP cache. Do you sort of see any room there for content publishers to be able to also work directly with ISP caches, and sort of in cases where CDNs don't want to implement open caching, allow content publishers to still utilize the benefits of it?
So let me repeat the question. So the question was, is there an opportunity in the current implementation or thought about the architecture to allow the content provider the opportunity to work and engage with those open caches in the ISP network? What do you guys think?
Well, I just offer one quick point on this to clarify. There's some content providers who just run their own CDN, right? So Netflix and the rest, and yeah, of course. I mean, there's provision, and I'm not deep into the technical requirements, but there's certainly provisions for use cases that allow the private CDN to invoke the use of an open cache. I don't know if this is the point that Zach was trying to drive at, but that particular use case is there, yeah. I think, certainly in our view, first and foremost is the commercial CDN arrangements. That's where the most leverage that makes the most sense for us. But
yeah, I think to add to what Mark was saying, if you look at the specifications as they stand today, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read through the request routing specification, but when it's thought about, it's not necessarily thought about as CDNs as strictly just a commercial CDN. It's some layer of caching and some managed configuration of some kind, right? So if you extrapolate that, you can say your local varnish is technically a cache that you're managing, and in turn has certain rule sets that you need to apply downstream to the open caching nodes. Now, it's therefore your responsibility as a content provider to effectively act as the CDN, negotiate all those agreements, negotiate those arrangements with the ISPs, and work with their technical stack to implement appropriately to how they potentially do it. We have a couple recommendations of different ways to go about it, but at the end of the day, it is ultimately then becomes kind of handed off to another layer. And so as a content provider at scale, we've thought about it as the CDNs provide a great layer of scale and also a great layer of normalization for us, where we don't necessarily have to worry about interfacing with all of the different ISPs and all of their different configurations and setups. But if you want to take it on, there's nothing in the spec that necessarily limits or suggests you don't have to, or that you should avoid or not using a CDN, right? It is part and parcel. You can swap your own setup in that place.
It's not going to cover your own configuration with open cache, though, isn't going to cover the entire footprint of the internet. You're just going to hit those areas. So effectively, you'd have to deliver content on the internet, you'd have to build a CDN to cover the rest of the space.
Right.
there. You don't have to work with somebody, but you're going to have something that covers it. It could just be a single location, but it would seem like that would be
Counterintuitive.
to what you're trying to accomplish by getting out to the last mile.
Yeah, again, it's not, I think, it's not something that is precluded, but it's just something that the more you think about it at scale, there is a great benefit that a CDN provides in that workflow of normalizing things.
Question over here.
Yeah, I think as you guys are talking about this, about the difference between live content and VOD content and all the different knobs that you would have on a CDN that would tune towards one versus another. How does that factor into this idea of open caching?
So let me repeat the question. So you're asking, how does the ability for tuning and optimizing the CDN play into open caching?
In particular with live versus VOD.
Okay, in particular with live versus VOD. Okay.
So I'll talk to you from the content side of things, because as part of the POC, we actually, and we still are as part of ongoing POCs, are handling both live and VOD content. They're sourced from the MLBAM side of things, and if you look at the content we're delivering and the configurations that we've set up with the CDNs who are in the middle, they're the same. We traditionally take a pretty traditional standard approach to everything across the board, but in case to this particular POC, they were the exact same configurations from our side as to how it related to the CDNs. From there, I'll kind of let the CDNs and the ISPs talk about if they made any specific changes to the live and VOD workflow. But from my work on the POC and from my kind of recapping and all the meetings we've had since, we tend to treat them as the same thing. If you can deliver for live, you can deliver for VOD. And so the goal was always, as part of the POCs, to have both in there so we could prove out both use cases. But I don't think we did anything special for either one, right?
No, it was the same.
Any thoughts, Brett?
I mean, there are some differences in how we handle live and on-demand video, but at the edge of the network, often they're pretty similar. It's fine tuning that we're making adjustments for there. I mean, a chunk is a chunk, and really what we're talking about is how long is that chunk going to be viable at the edge of the network for. So as long as we're able to make sure that we're flushing that out of the edge of the cache so that we're not delivering stale content to folks, that's really the big difference in the delivery of the two.
A question right here.
So, is there any kind of new pricing and charging models for using open caching?
So let me repeat the question. Are there any differences in the business model when it comes to charging and pricing for open caching?
Answer from the CDN side, I think we're still figuring that out. I think that's ground that's not completely covered yet. It's a pretty new space for us, so how that will fall out and where we'll get to on it, I'm not sure is completely clear yet. There's a lot of bits to be figured out when I charge for a bit that's out in somebody else's network, or how do those models work, and what is the responsibility for the delivery that has to be figured out in there. So there's an awful lot of conversations that we're having about it, but I don't think that the model is completely clear yet on how it changes. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, and the only reason that we're interested in it as a company, is that we're trying to improve, and we'll do whatever to improve the quality of delivery for the end user at it. So if we're doing that, then that's the win for everybody that's at the table here, including the folks that are at home watching that don't get to get much choice in how it gets to them. At some point soon, I think we'll have it figured out, but not quite there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Brett. I'll just add a couple of thoughts around maybe principles, not actual pricing, but I think the notion is, and it seems to ring true with the ISPs that we're talking to, is that they present this as infrastructure that, if you will, is available kind of on a wholesale basis upstream to a commercial CDN or a private CDN, but the economics has to be such that in theory it's as good as or better than whatever costs the current CDN is incurring to reach into that ISP network. So maybe that's a paid peering arrangement? I don't know. And it may vary based on ISP, but there has to clearly be, at least in our view, and I'm not speaking for the ISPs on this, but an incentive for the commercial CDNs or private CDNs to want to access this new infrastructure because it does all the things that Brett just described: better quality, more capacity, and improves margins. And I think we're cautiously optimistic that all those principles will hold true, but as Brett says, we don't know the details at the moment.
All right, so let me actually ask you guys another question. So I asked the audience, I asked you guys and girls, how many people were watching online video on their phones? A bunch of you raised your hands. So we know that delivering video to mobile devices is tricky, to say the least, right? You have variability. So consumer moves between cell towers, consumer moves between Wi-Fi and cell, all sorts of things can happen. So I want to ask the panel, what do you guys think about open caching helping out some of those problems? Would there be improvement with the end user experience by mobile ISPs having open caches in their network and being able to deliver, and even if it's just popular content, closer to the end user? I mean, what do you guys think about that? Solving the world's problems, starting with mobile.
Yeah, I guess I can sort of start. Our version of mobile is really a hotspot, sort of, potentially moving at 600 miles an hour. So we
That's a fast hotspot.
Yeah, it's a fast-moving hotspot. So, I'll use live as an example. I think live, and in particular sports, because it has such a demand, such a high interest when compelling events occur. Anything that we can do to really relieve, basically relieve the congestion and improve the quality at the same time by making sure you only need to send one copy of this, compelling live event to a hotspot, and that can be an aircraft, flying between two city pairs that has a baseball game between any of the city pairs, or it could be in Mexico at a village where they want to watch the national football game or the regional football team or what have you. Things like that I think can greatly improve what's going on there.
Okay.
I have friends that will book their flights now based on the fact that they know they can get the game they want to see on the flight. Right? So they're making an airline carrier choice not based on miles anymore, but just on the fact that they'll be able to watch the game they want to see.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty impressive shift there. I think that live is really the clear place where getting the cache out closer to the edge for very popular events can make a significant impact, especially on something like an airplane where you might have several people wanting to watch the same piece of content, and it is traveling at 600 miles an hour. It's a difficult problem to solve for. The on-demand stuff, I'm not personally sure how much getting that cache edge means closer in, because the libraries now across the type of customers that I'm seeing are so large that the odds that you're doing cache hit on the next one for a small group of eyeballs probably isn't very high.
So we're actually thinking about localized caches on airplanes? Is that a thought?
Yeah, I think it's a thought. I mean, I think for live, you don't really need too much storage to pull that one off. But the cost of storage keeps going down. So same reason that edge caches on the ground can grow. I think edge caches, sort of anywhere can grow anywhere. Even, I think there's ideas out there around home gateways, even things like that. So
Lose some room in the bulkhead, though.
Any
Some less
thoughts on that,
space.
Mark?
No, I mean, I think the principle is it has to hold true in mobile because as going forward, that's where everything is happening. We've looked carefully at the Mobile Edge Compute Initiative. We've looked at what some of the big OEMs are doing with opening up the eNode B so that there's room for an app or a cache that can live there and do its task. And I think the point about live is exactly correct. This is where maybe the greatest value is achieved. So it makes perfect sense. I think we'll see it develop.
All right, let's turn it back to the audience again. So any other questions out there for our panelists about open caching, about your thoughts around the architecture, components, pieces, building trust? Okay, I've got another question for you guys, don't worry. I came prepared. All right, so I want to come back to this concept of trust and collaboration. And you guys talked about it a bunch. I sort of summarized it in talking about what we've spoken about and had a discussion here about. And so how do we get everyone to come to the table? I mean, you guys are at the table, it's great, that's fantastic. You're representing different constituents within, you know, the value chain, but how do we get everyone else to come to the table? I mean, how do we get people to adopt open caching and have, as Brett talked about it, talk about Fight Club, right? How do we get people to do that? Oh, it's a softball question, come on.
So, what we see all the time is that it's a Pepsi challenge. And it's a Pepsi challenge that's not what it was at one point, where they're using a Keynote or a Gomez to go through and do testing and prove out which one's better. It's a Pepsi challenge where you're winning packets every day, where our performance was slightly better in this market, on this ASN, this other CDN was slightly better in this, so they're getting traffic routed based on those things. I think the way you get people to come to the table is by winning the Pepsi challenge, by being the best solution that's out there. So in the places where you put in an open cache server, if it outperforms everybody else, others will come to the table on it. Other content companies will come to the table, other CDNs will come to the table. It'll spread the idea, I think, through winning.
Okay.
I think, you know, you started the panel with kind of mentioning quality, economics, and reach are kind of key factors. The more we can prove out consistently that open caching works to improve quality, to improve the economics for everyone involved, and in turn improve the reach, and for me reach kind of means consistency as well, and stability. The more we can prove out those 3 points, the more and more people can jump on board. I will say that, you know, when it comes to working with the partners as part of the POCs and working as part of the kind of Streaming Video Alliance, there's a great deal of openness to the events, and there's also a great deal of information sharing. And, you know, we meet every other week and have conversations every other week on our specific topics. So there's value in just the idea sharing in and of itself, right? The exposure to new ideas, the exposure to new partners, and differing ways to think about problems that I think over time will continue to gain traction. You know, the specs are coming fast and furious. I think in the Open Caching Working Group, we're up to 3 or 4 different ones that are either out there or nearing completion. And the more we continue to put those out there, the hope is that more and more people will read them, interface with them, and start to see some of the benefits that can be gained for them. And while we're still in kind of that phase of figuring out, you know, the ISPs and the CDNs figuring out all the commercials, as a content provider, I can at least put my content out there to start testing to see what type of performance I could get with all of the partners we already have in place. And at the end of the day, you know, the hope is that we'll all benefit from it, if not in actuality in the next year or two, at least in a couple of years' time when things are starting to get more and more formalized.
So I think it's, you know, it's the trust but verify approach. So I think, you know, we've seen talks now. It seems like it's been a year or two now with the multi-CDN strategies. They're able to do performance load balancing. The concept of A/B testing. I think, you know, the CDN should be able to A/B test on the ISP's network when they're using open caching and not using open caching, and the content provider can, you know, A/B test between CDNs, and they should be able to, on a consistent basis, always see the better performance when they're using these alternative methods. And so I guess the quicker we can get to that sort of situation where we can prove that out, I think the better. But I think, you know, we should be always proving it, right?
Mark, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 very good signals so far, right? The Streaming Video Alliance and what it's done so far, pointing us in the right direction. Next is the POC we announced in January, and the fact that we're all sitting here on this panel, apparently still friends in the process. And then, you know, I would say we challenge ourselves to come back in a year's time because our sense is we're seeing some of the commercial CDNs really engage heavily on this and lean in and show great interest in doing the work that needs to be done to you know, integrate and scale. So I would expect by next year this time we'll have some great stories to tell on that front, and that, you know, success breeds success. That accelerates the whole process, I think.
And we'll hopefully we'll have some data, right? We'll have
Exactly,
some
yeah.
results.
That's right.
And I know that one of the things that we're doing now, to what Eric just pointed out, that the Alliance will be publishing 2 new specifications for open caching very soon, and that POC will enter into sort of a phase 2. So we'll have more companies involved. We'll extend out against these new specifications. So yeah, so I think, to your point, maybe people coming to the table is really all about, yes, trust, but it's also about results.
Correct.
Right? You can't bring people to the table and participate in this without seeing something like, hey, wow, that really worked. I want to try that next time. All right, so one more time. Any questions from the audience for our panelists? Over here, Dom.
Jyoti, so can you give me some examples of some features and capabilities that OpenCache brings that say you can't get readily with Squid, Nginx, Apache, Varnish, and so on? Are there any good key sort of frontline examples?
So let me repeat that question. So you want to know what are the key features of open caching that differ from other caching services like a Varnish or an Nginx or a Squid? Ideas?
I don't think they necessarily differ. I think it's an extension of those. So it's that next level out, right? Because you can work with ISPs to replicate whatever caching implementation you're doing at their layer and at their edge. But if it's not done in a standard formalized manner, you're stuck in kind of a Netflix style model where you're responsible to manage and interface and maintain all of those. And so if you roll it back and you say, okay, I've got a lot of the similar functionality that I currently have with either my local Varnish or my CDNs that I'm working with, but it's now just further distributed out to the edge. What can I do with it there? What can I inform it to do? How can I work with it to improve that performance and improve that delivery and also expand my reach, right? What's available to me as to where I can seed that content. There's nothing in the specification today that is handling anything other than for general use cases in the request flow, where we talk about a lot of the different use cases in the request routing specification, some logging and some other ideas in some of the other specifications coming. But there's nothing unique or specific about those ideas that haven't been done by a CDN today and or hasn't been thought of with traditional caching methods. And so it's now just taking it to that next level of expanding it out to the edge and seeing what others do there. Right? ISPs might end up implementing something unique with the open caching nodes that no CDN's thought of, and in turn, everyone can benefit.
Just to add to that quickly, and I agree exactly with what Eric said. So, at the end, it comes down to really scale, cost, quality. So one would have to expect that for this to be better, let's call it, the edge cloud, this massively distributed open caching infrastructure, it can perform at scale, cost, and quality in a way that makes it attractive to the upstream CDNs to take advantage of it. So that's kind of one part of this. Secondly, it doesn't answer your question directly, but it's just to plug for our ISP partners. There is some interesting work that they're doing, and there's one working group in the Streaming Video Alliance that Yahoo's running on scaling that's looking at things like multicast, ABR in the access network, things like LTE broadcast, where the ISP has like a special position and they can activate some of these things that I think, let me say in broad brush, are good for the ecosystem potentially to help us scale and deliver in quality, and that they're in a kind of a unique position to really drive. And if that can be done successfully, I'm not trying to sell either of those, but if it can be done successfully, we're all better off. And again, this is another reason why having real collaboration all the way through the end-to-end ecosystem, and especially having the ISPs participate more proactively, that can help all of us. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, we've got 2 minutes, so maybe time for one more question if anybody's got one? No? All right, so can everybody join me in giving a round of applause to our wonderful panelists here? Great job, guys. Fantastic.